As we've mentioned a few times now, the entire purpose of the LSAT is for you to demonstrate that you have the skills necessary to succeed in law school and as an attorney. So what exactly do lawyers do all day? Well, they argue a lot. Whether they're negotiating complex contracts, trying to manipulate the meaning of a statute, or obviously arguing in court in front of a judge, being a lawyer means, first and foremost, being able to engage with argument. And so that's what the logical reasoning section is all about. In fact, until 2020, there used to be 2 logical reasoning sections instead of 1, meaning that a whopping 50% of your LSAT score used to depend entirely on your argumentation skills. It's down to just 1 LR section now, but that doesn't change the fact that these argumentation skills are heavily woven into the other 2 section types as well. The logical reasoning section will test the skills of argument analysis in 3 main ways: by seeing if you can manipulate bad arguments, analyze good arguments, and describe arguments in general. In our language, we call these skills assumptions, formal logic, and descriptive analysis, but you don't have to worry about those names yet. They'll be described in more detail in later lessons. For now, what's important to note is that every single question on the LR section will simply be asking you to do 1 or 2 of these 3 things. Like we talked about in the last video, there might be 17 different question types, but those are really just trivial ways of asking you to do the same basic things in slightly different ways. This Venn diagram is one of the central logical reasoning pillars at Apollo. You'll be seeing this Venn diagram very often as you move through this course. Each circle represents one of the 3 core skills, with each question type placed in the circle or circles of the skills that it uses. Don't worry about the question types yet, though. We love this visual because it perfectly illustrates the fact that every question type is just a small variation on the same 3 basic skills. To master every question type, you don't need to utilize a million strategies or memorize a bunch of facts. You just need to learn how to do these 3 things really, really well. Here's a brief overview of each of the 3 central logical reasoning skills. The first and most important thing you'll have to do is manipulate bad arguments through assumptions. This is the most popular skill on the test, and over 60% of LR questions will ask you to use it. For these kinds of questions, the passage will contain an argument that has some sort of gap or weakness, and the question will ask you to do something about those gaps. Whether that's filling those gaps, which is called strengthening, widening those gaps, which is called weakening, or simply pointing them out by finding the flaw. Hopefully you can see why this skill is so central to the LSAT. After all, what else do lawyers do all day if not find weaknesses in other people's arguments? The second central LR skill is understanding good arguments through formal logic. Formal logic is essentially a symbolic language that we use to describe and deal with perfectly good arguments. It's the same language that underlies most of computer science, and it's how we can prove things with absolute certainty. By the end of this course, you'll be fluent in it. This skill is also central to the logic game section and will be one of your most handy tools throughout the entire test. The final central logical reasoning skill is describing arguments through what we call descriptive analysis. This skill overlaps with the other 2 quite a bit, as you'll have to describe both good and bad arguments. The skill of argument description is especially important for making sense of tough answer choices. Understanding the argument is one thing, but choosing the answer choice that describes it in exactly the right way is another. To do this well, you'll really need to hone your ability to read critically and literally, to make sure you only pick the answer choice that says exactly what you need it to and nothing more or less. This skill also has a lot of carryover to the reading comprehension section, but you'll hear more on that later. The first unit will dive in depth into what an argument is and how to understand them, but for now, just remember that everything you do on this test will in some way tie back to the basic skill of argument analysis.